Most big ticket, complex B2B industrial sales forecasts are junk. They're junk because most sales reps don't understand how business buying decisions are made. And this is endemic. We've got to fix it, and I've got some recommendations. The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. They have lots of technically interesting and cordial meetings that never actually get to the actual buying decision makers. I'm Ed Marsh. I'm the host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, and changing things up a bit today with a solo episode because there's a topic that I've spent a lot of time thinking about that I think causes lots of problems in the B2B industrial world of complex sales, and that's what we're going to focus on today. What do I mean by complex sales? Well, big ticket, say more than $100,000, large buying team, 8 to 12 people, long sales cycle, say 3, 4, 5, 6 to 12 or 18 months, and significant business and professional impact in case of a mistake. I mean, nobody wants to make a mistake buying a $100,000 reefer truck, but you can go and rent one tomorrow if you need to, and it doesn't shut down your factory if you buy the wrong one. But if you buy the wrong $100,000 production scheduling software or some kind of a critical piece of processing equipment, you've got a real problem if that's wrong, if it's a mistake. So first, some context. Why do I think this is a critical issue now? Let's run through some stats on how difficult sales is today. These come from various places, including research from Trust Radius, Pavilion, Sixth Sense, and the Jolt Effect book primarily. So here are some numbers. 40 to 60% of reps are missing quota. Forecasts are horribly inaccurate. Many execs I speak to waste hours trying to dig through detail, ask questions, recast it, to try to see what's realistic. And it's embarrassing, in meetings with investors and owners and banks to promise, oh yeah, next quarter is looking good. We got all these deals that are going to close. They're due to close. We're confident about them, and it doesn't happen. 40 to 60% of sales deals end in no decision. Nothing was ever bought. These were deals that somebody said, yeah, this is looking good. We put a close date on it and a likelihood that we're going to win the deal. Buying teams are typically 8 to 12 people in most manufacturing environments. Buying journeys can be a year, give or take. Up to 75% of buyers wish that they could have a sales rep-free experience. They don't want to deal with a rep. Most buyers think there's essential parity between most products and services. These features that your team, your R&D team has stayed up late and you've done press releases about them, you think they're critical differentiation. They're not, at least as far as buyers are concerned. Roughly 80% of the time, the first vendor who's contacted wins the order. And 70% of the time, the vendors on the short list were known to the buyers before they even began a project. 84% of the time, there is no change in the specification once the vendors are contacted. So in other words, all this great stuff and confidence about how your team can go in and explain why your features are important, why your product's better, it's just not effective. Of course, there's other scary news here too. If your company's prospecting consists of outreach to uncover pending opportunities, you're fighting an uphill battle. They probably know your prospects probably know what they want to buy and from who. I'm sure, of course, they'll appreciate your third quote and your free consulting and, in the unlikely chance you help them think of something they hadn't thought of or bring a different perspective, but you're not likely going to win the order. So that means we need to get good at creating projects rather than just finding them. And all of this together means the selling is harder than it's ever been. And so reps need to be better. But, it's a big but. Reps need to be better and in different ways. So it's not doing the same things they've traditionally done, but doing them more efficiently with AI. We need to up the game. They need to bring business acumen and business finance familiarity to conversations. They need to differentiate your company by the quality and depth of the conversations they have and how they help prospects visualize the existing gap between the current state and the desired state, and their ability to engender trust and confidence that they and you, your company by extension, can help to achieve that. But here's the rub. Most industrial sales efforts focus on the final in a series of 5 buying decisions. They focus on the vendor selection. That's the last step. And the conversations are based on the product or the service. Sales reps are often hired for their ability to be conversant in technical detail. The conversations, of course, are the ones they're comfortable having with technical buyers. In other words, folks like controls engineers and plant engineers and process engineers, people like that, IT, they are charged with making sure that, the machinery, and many of my clients sell capital equipment. So in this case, we'll talk about machinery. Those engineers are charged with making sure that the machinery they purchase is thoroughly vetted, that, the concrete footings are correct, in the right places, poured correctly to support the right weight. Line layouts are carefully planned. Utility requirements can be accommodated. The raw material, the incoming and outgoing material flow works. That speeds and surge capacity are adequate. Current and planned material types and sizes and volumes are feasible, and on and on and on. All the critically important details. Those are the conversations reps know that they can handle. And they're very comfortable, most of them, when they don't know the answer. They make a list and they've got internal experts to who they turn for, specific answers. But remember from the statistics above, this is to make sure that the specification that has been created is met by the vendors. As much as we'd like to talk about total lifetime value, the lifespan, the durability of our solution, the parts availability, support access, and other kinds of factors that we think are important, I can tell you from firsthand conversations, most buyers just assume that. So it doesn't matter if you get warm and fuzzy feedback, that a project engineer really appreciates the depth of knowledge and technical expertise of your sales team. The biggest decision to which they're going to contribute in most cases is a vendor selection. Which vendor is most likely to succeed if this project moves ahead? Now, I'm not diminishing the importance of this function at all. What these engineers do is critical. We've all seen the nightmare outcomes when details are overlooked, and there's massive disruption and horrendous cost, and people lose their jobs, and you got to get it right. And folks are charged with that, and that's their job. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But nobody buys enterprise manufacturing software because they like the data table structure. Nobody buys capital equipment because the HMI is well designed and intuitive. They make those purchases, whether it's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, because of the outcome, what it means for the business, how it changes the condition of the business. These are business decisions. Capital is not unlimited. Capital is scarce. It must be allocated. Engineers can and should and do offer opinions on how likely a project is to deliver the outcome on which a justification is built. But somewhere, some person or group of people make business decisions about investments. And if we're not speaking to them, we're entirely at the mercy of whatever ideas and vision they have, right and valid or wrong and misguided. And to forecast a likelihood of close in your pipeline without knowing who's making that money decision, how and when, just based on reassuring technical meetings, that results in the silly forecasts that we see. I mean, I hope you hear as I'm describing it, how actually absurd it actually is when we think about it in detail. So let's look at what these 5 buying decisions are. First, are we going to put any resources into evaluating whether this is a problem that should be potentially solved, and what potential solutions are there, et cetera? Second, are we going to request capital? Third, will capital be approved? Fourth, how will we select a vendor? And fifth, the vendor selection. Now, the vendor selection, I think, as we dig into it, you're going to see that fifth decision is the one where almost all your sales efforts are concentrated, and it completely ignores the business decision. But let's look at each in a bit more detail. So, one, are we going to put any resources into evaluating this? If a company thinks that they can save material money or create opportunity, they'll task someone with doing some research. And if they don't have resources to dig in a little bit and do some research, then guess what? They're not going to have resources to actually support implementing a project, even if they've got unlimited capital. So this research, it could be the CFO checking on historical numbers. It could be an engineer doing some time studies, or a consultant suggesting some options. But if there's no commitment of, official, and if there's no official commitment of some resources to investigate with the goal of the research being to establish, or without there being a clear timeline, goals for the research, an accountable person, and a plan for evaluating the findings, then there's nothing to work on. I mean, just to be clear, there are times when sales reps get involved here. Sometimes there's a feasibility question. Maybe a company has allocated some resources to do this research. And the question is, can this even be done? Does anybody have a solution that will accomplish it? What's the cost order of magnitude? And so at this stage, some order of magnitude of pricing and an understanding of what sorts of factors might impact that pricing are relevant. But there's no project that's appropriate to forecast with any likelihood of close. Maybe you put it in your pipeline as something that's pending, and you make sure that you stay in touch with people and continue to add value through the process, but you can't put it in your forecast as likely to close. So the second decision, will we request capital? Now, this one's important because often sales reps assume that they can do some simple ROI calculations that, we've all seen them. It means that this project's a layup. Say it costs $200,000 and pays itself back in 9 months based on their cursory understanding of the business cost and objectives. But here's the thing. First of all, there's probably lots of other data behind the calculations that may impact them, and assumptions that we may make as salespeople, which are faulty. But further, there are a host of other considerations, business uncertainty, for instance, based on what's going on in the market, or possible pending orders. If they think they're going to get a big new customer, that may impact the way they think about it, or M&A activity. And there may be too many other projects. Yeah, sure. This one makes sense kind of in isolation, but what if it's not the highest priority? And what if there aren't enough people to manage projects? What if there's no time in the calendar to shut down production to implement a new machine? Perhaps it creates too much disruption with a key customer's production, and sales doesn't want to support it. Or all the available money in the capital budget maybe is going into cybersecurity this year, regardless of how much they'd love to do some operational improvement. Often the people at the plant level don't have clear insight into these corporate priorities. Sometimes they're not even clear at a local level what the priorities are. They've got a specific range of responsibilities they have, and that's where they're working. So even at the people at the plant level, they may stack rank projects since they can't ask for everything that they'd like. And this is where consultative sales and establishing a compelling reason to buy are so important. It's also a decision that owners and senior executives may be able to make, with the board, shifting priorities. Some of these questions about how to allocate resources. The point is that somebody has to actually say, yes, we're going to put this on the list. And it's not, as we often assume, that it is. Just because we think it's important doesn't mean that it's important to them. Or even if it's important to them, doesn't mean that it's the highest priority that they're told they have to work on. The third decision, will capital be approved? By what process? By whom? When? And according to what criteria? If you're selling a $10 million line to a $100 million company, the board is going to be involved. I don't care if the plant manager or the GM says it's his or her decision. I don't care if the president or CEO says it's his or her decision. I mean, certainly they all can decide what they want to recommend, And if they advise against it, it may not make it to the board. But if just because they want to do it, just because they say they think it's something they should do, the board is going to have to sign off. Now, maybe it's on just kind of a full slate of investment with a list of projects without detail around yours. Or maybe it's at an annual meeting with a presentation about each capital investment over a certain threshold. Or maybe it's on the fly decision by electronic unanimous consent voting. And maybe, of course, there will be disagreement about how investment capital is allocated, and maybe the board will turn some projects down, specifically line items that the team is investigating. But this step is critical because without it, a project never happens, regardless of how well a rep has impressed technical buyers or how elegant the solution they're proposing actually is. Now, the closest I would say that most reps get to this is by asking, who's the decision maker and what if capital is approved? And let's be honest, the people they're asking typically don't know. And a CEO, if they're asking the CEO, will often say, well, I'm the CEO, assuming that the board will take his or her recommendation, but they're not the decision maker. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand who on the board is likely to be the fly in the ointment, then we can't do anything about it. So people that we ask those questions often don't know, or they give us a comfortable answer, or they give us what they think is an honest answer without thinking about what the process is actually going to be. I mean, after all, how many times have you heard, well, we're pulling it all together and then we're going to send it up the flagpole? Well, guess what? That means there's somebody else deciding, and there's opacity around who that is. So if you can't answer these questions quantitatively and qualitatively, and if your reps can't answer them, and if you haven't ideally had conversations with key players, maybe even a board presentation and a clear identification of what projects yours is competing against for the same capital, then you can't consider your project 90% likely to close. You just don't know. You're guessing based on the feedback you're getting from the technical buyers. All right. The fourth buying decision is how the vendor selection will be done. Will it be based on an incumbent or an RFQ or the key criteria, et cetera? And then finally, the fifth buying decision is the vendor selection. And this is the one that gets all of the attention where we think we're competing. We could be just virtually chasing windmills because the people in charge have no intention of funding what we're talking about. If we don't know, for instance, that a project they're asking us to provide a detailed proposal for how we would handle a certain kind of a manufacturing situation, if that is solely to help them prepare their bid for a large customer opportunity they're working on, which, of course, their forecast is likely to be about as reliable as ours is. So no matter what they tell you, it's probably not reliable. We don't have, no matter how much they like our technical solution, no matter how much they think it fits exactly what they need to do, if they don't get that order, they're not going to invest in this, and we don't have a project. So this tells us a couple things. First, we need reps, sales reps, who have the presence, the business acumen, the financial familiarity to converse with folks who are approving or not approving, disapproving capital. Of course, they also need to be able to speak with line workers and maintenance managers as well as engineers. They need to be chameleons, able to have appropriate conversations across all of those. But it means that simply hiring somebody for their industry experience is an asinine threshold. I mean, seriously, think about it. Because they have had 3 stints of 3 years with 3 people in the industry, yeah, they can have those conversations with technical buyers. They may even have some in their Rolodex. But think about what that means. If it's a 12-month sales cycle, they get hired. They go through the onboarding period. They need time to ramp up. They go through a sales cycle. It's not happening. Somebody starts to look at them, maybe start to hold them accountable. Maybe they get put on a PIP and they understand what's coming. And so 3 or 4 years later, they leave and they go and they do the next iteration. They do the next iteration. These are not superstars. If they were superstars, they'd be staying there. Of course, maybe the company's acquired and it changes the culture. And of course, there are legitimate reasons why people leave. But the point is simply hiring people for their ability to be conversant in technical details only helps you maybe with the first buying decision, maybe if they've got good relationships and they can influence the fourth buying decision, and with the fifth one, the vendor selection. But If you're not part of the short list, you're not going to get the order. If that short list is working on an RFQ that was partially created with the help of another one of your competitors, you're not going to get that order. Only 16% of the time can you change that. So this is critical. We have to have salespeople with the business acumen. Second, we have to be able to uncover the business situation. What are their priorities? Where is capital going? What happens if this project doesn't get funded? How do they see this as changing their business? What projects will have to get deferred in order to fund this one? And what are the consequences of that deferral? Now, these are just some examples. Obviously, these are very complex discussions and they're going to follow a very winding path, but salespeople have to be able to have these conversations. In a privately held company, if you're selling to a privately held company, the board and the priorities may boil down to family income. I mean, maybe the CEO is thinking about buying a plane, and that's going to get the capital, or upgrading the boat. Or maybe there's suddenly a bunch of new fourth generation college grads that are due to start receiving distributions. Maybe the company's thinking about selling and they want to shore up their financials at the expense of short term operating deterioration. They're willing to forego doing things they know would help the operation just because they want strong financial statements. In a large publicly held company, you're not going to speak to the board. We can be realistic about that. And your $2 million project will probably be embedded in some line they see on a slide. But the division president or the regional VP or somebody at that level, they know what's going on. And that's where our sales reps should be speaking in those situations. Average sales reps that are talking to technical buyers are never going to know any of this. That's not a knock on the technical buyers. And, it's not a knock on the sales reps either. We've hired them, and this is what we've told them we want them to do. As far as the technical buyers go, often they don't know, and they're not invited to ask or participate. They put their recommendations and requests in the required format. And as we already talked about, they set it up the flagpole. And then they sit waiting with the same anticipation and dread as you do, because in many cases, they want these projects to happen because it's going to make their job easier. They just don't know what's likely to occur. This means, of course, that our forecasts are completely unreliable. I mean, think about yours. Can your reps answer qualitatively and quantitatively the kinds of questions that I've asked so far in this conversation? If not, they're just hoping. I mean, even close date, something as simple as a close date, when you say a close date and it says September 30th, how many deals actually have to close by September 30th? And why is that? Because the rep needs a deal in the quarter and hopes that he or she will get it and hit their number, or because a technical buyer hopes to cross it off their list by then, or they were told, the company wants to have it figured out by the end of Q3, or because there's a compelling business reason why that deadline can't slip, some sort of a regulatory reason, or the tax rates will change if the capital isn't spent, or whatever the case may be. So where am I going with this? First, I want you to be aware of it. I want you to keep it in mind as you have conversations with your sales team. Think about how you make business purchasing decisions and how often your vendors have any clue about the myriad of factors that you're juggling and considering that are involved in the decision. And questions related to pipeline and forecast, introduce the idea of these 5 buying decisions to your team as you talk about pipeline and forecast, as you talk about deal qualification. Second, you got to recognize this demands superb talent, sales training, sales coaching, sales process, sales methodology, role playing, deal qualification scorecards, playbooks, a lot of frameworks in order to make this all happen, and the right people. These conversations are hard. They're not going to feel natural. It's going to take work to build the right team that can do this. Now, here's my little pitch. I help companies put this stuff in place, find the right people, coach them, establish a methodology, build the process, build the playbooks, all that kind of stuff that's necessary to make this work. But here's the thing. And so now you've heard the bad news, the hard work that's going to be involved. Here's the good news. You're going to be the only company doing this, and your team is going to be able to create projects rather than simply react. You'll be differentiating your company because none of your competitors and none of the companies competing for the same capital for different projects are going to be doing this. So that means that you will be able to establish your business as different, not based on simple features, but based on the way you're selling, based on the conversations, the quality of conversations that your salespeople are having. And you're going to be able to influence the outcomes because you're going to be participating in conversations where these critical decisions are made, as opposed to just sitting there looking at your pipeline every week or every month, believing that someday suddenly lightning's going to strike. If you don't do this, you're not selling and you're not accurately forecasting. So please understand this framework of 5 buying decisions. It may not apply precisely in your industry or your specific go-to-market approach, and you may see differences in the specifics of where you're of your particular situation. But for most B2B industrial complex sales situations, it's pretty close. It's a good framework to use. You might even think about how to fold this into your sales process milestones, your deal qualification scorecards, and more. So that 5th buying decision, the vendor selection, where all of the technical conversations happen, is not a determinant of whether this project is going to close. That decision happens in capital allocation somewhere earlier in the process or in parallel, and often in an opaque way. We have to figure out how to see into that opaque decision. Otherwise, we're not selling. I'm Ed Marsh. I host the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Most episodes have a guest where I ask them a number of questions about some very specific expertise they have and try to tease out some actionable insights for you to consider. Going forward, I think the podcast, I'm going to mix it up a little bit more, some free-form conversations, shorten the interviews up a little bit, and perhaps some more specific commentary like this. So please drop your comments below if you strongly disagree, if you agree, if you've never thought about it, whatever your reaction is to this, please drop some comments. I'm happy to read them and respond to them. You do the rest of the drill, like, share, and by all means, please subscribe as well. Pass this along to people who you think would get some value from it. Appreciate your tuning in for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.